panellists today are, in no particular order, John Cassie, Director of 3D at Sky TV.
Hello.
We have Celia Taylor, Head of Factual and Features at Sky. We have David Pounds, Chief Executive of Electric Sky, not a relative, completely unconnected. And some of their forthcoming 3D productions for Sky, co-productions, are Wildebeest and Rainforest. That's David Pounds. And at the end, Sias Wilson, line producer at Atlantic Productions, who made Flying Monsters, presented by David Attenborough, which was absolutely breathtaking, I thought. So what we'll do, we're here to discuss 3D. We're obviously going to grill these various experts about how to do it, how expensive it is, whether it is the future, have a good old discussion and debate, but also we're going to throw questions to the floor at the end, and we'd love your input, and we'd like to know what you think. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, may I ask you to don your glasses and let's have a little taste of 3D on these rather fancy LG tellies. Take it away, technical men.
It in and Kabul got the touch and scores! Eto trying to wriggle away from Hutton, and he has! Brilliant finish!
Well, that was very impressive. I think you'll all agree. I don't know why though we had to have 3D footage of Spurs conceding a goal. I think that was pretty harsh. But apart from that, it was impressive stuff. John, let me sort of ask you first of all, kick off by asking you. How much 3D is actually produced on British TV at the moment?
Well, in terms of, so that tape that you guys saw there was produced, that was originated entirely by Sky's investment. So whether that's through indies or through our own people, but so that is an example of the sort of things we're doing. We are making probably more 3D than any other broadcaster in the world right now. We've done over 100 live sports events, and also we only went on air in October of last year, so we've been on air for about 8-9 months. But we've done over 100 live sports events. We're showing movies from all the major studios, and we're making original programming across pretty much all of the genres. So.
Having very much, been a huge sort of champion of HD up till this point. What is the sort of origin of the strategic decision by Sky to say, yeah, we're really buying into this, we really want to do this? Why do you think that? What is it about the technology, do you think?
Well, I guess, if you go back to the most sort of simple thing, if we're a pay TV broadcaster, and if people are going to pay you to watch telly, you've got to make sure you offer something that's different or better, worth paying for, compared to what's available for free. And Sky's always looked to innovate and to do things differently. So whether that's how we covered the Premier League, how we develop breaking news, whether it's interactive red button type things, HD, and 3D is a new way of basically showing people TV entertainment in a way that they've never been able to experience it previously.
Celia, our focus is on Factual today. Do you see 3D as being the future for Factual TV?
I think it's one way of doing it, but I think what's special about Factual is that it brings, most Factual is about the world we live in or the people we live in, and I think what 3D brings is a whole new experiential involvement in the content. And I think, we've been having some fantastic experiences and experiments doing Factual television in 3D, and it just works so brilliantly. And even the simplest thing, you'll see later there's some landscape footage that we shot. It's just landscape, but in 3D it just looks absolutely incredible. And I think that's the biggest learning is that you can make this content just feel so extraordinarily special, and I think Factual lends itself perfectly to that.
David, what's your view on this, and why do you think that the industry is actually taking 3D a lot more seriously now?
Well, there's a commercial reason. That is that it moves HD along, and remember, it takes your HD customer up to 3D. But it's also a creative aspect to it that is enabling producers to go into another medium, another extension of the medium, but also to future-proof their programming, because 3D is going to be around for a long time. So if you're making 3D now, if it's the right sort of program, it will stand up for many years to come.
Sias, you spent a lot of time sitting in the edit, watching the great David Attenborough, and putting together that extraordinary piece of television that was The Flying Monsters. I mean, do you see 3D as being a point at which we can't return?
Yes, yeah. I think what will happen is there'll be steady growth, and eventually, I don't think everything will be in 3D, because there's ways of telling stories in 2D, but I think that more and more we'll see more and more content in 3D, and it fits nicely with Factual, because we can go into those worlds in 3D. So yeah, definitely.
What's amazing about I think of 3D as this amazingly sort of futuristic technology, but it's also incredibly venerated and ancient. And I think, is it at least 100 years old?
It is. 1860 was the first 3D. Méliès was inadvertent. We just done a documentary called Brian May's Brief History of 3D, so I can actually bore you about the history of 3D. But yeah, it's been around for much longer than you would imagine.
And although it's incredibly super duper what they do now, when we look at these screens, but the principles of it are actually the same, really, ultimately, aren't they? Fundamentally. So speaking of history, Sky did have an amazing treasure trove of a program, which was the World War II in 3D, because it turns out that the Nazis, being the great propagandists that they were, and the great visual propagandists that they were, took a lot of photographs and shot film in 3D by way of propaganda to make Hitler look even more sort of impressive, in inverted commas. So that was a bit of a groundbreaking piece of telly. So let's see a clip of the World War II in 3D, courtesy of Sky.
The Second World War's violent, disturbing images have been transformed.
Lived it.
Got to remember to take my glasses off, otherwise I'm going to look quite silly. But or maybe a pop star. That's one advantage, I suppose. But let me ask you, Celia, how much Factual does Sky actually produce now?
What, overall or in 3D?
Yeah, overall in 3D. Actually, in 3D.
Oh, in 3D. Oh, I don't know. How many hours have we done? Probably.
I mean, a sort of ballpark sort of.
We must be up to about 25, 30 hours by now.
Yeah, something in the
I
last
would
few
imagine.
months, yeah.
Yeah.
But we're going to ramp it up quite considerably over the next couple of years. So we're actively
I mean, we've only been on air since October, so we haven't had a lot of time to get content. But yeah, more and more all the time.
As a commissioning editor, how do you know what you're actually looking for, given that it's such a new territory for everyone?
I think what I get a lot of is people going, and it'd be great in 3D, and I'm kind of like, well, that bit would be great in 3D, but not the whole thing would be good in 3D. Or they think, or it's a 2D as an HD idea, but it's just in 3D. So we can get very hung up on what is a good 3D idea. Actually, what is a good television idea? And then how do you articulate that in 3D is the best way to come at it.
And John, in general, in terms of how much 3D Sky now broadcast, a lot of big football events, I mean, quite a few matches per year.
Yeah.
Approximately how many Premiership games the season
Well,
just
we're doing about 4 live events a week, so that could be across rugby or football or cricket or whatever it may be. But pretty much, every weekend you will see big matches.
I think the best thing about football in 3D is it really makes everyone the referee, because you do get a view where you can see that dodgy tackle. It's quite. It adds to the great sort of debate involved in watching football down the pub. Now let's have a look at a really kind of flagship piece of television that broadcast in 3D. Somehow, marvellously, David Attenborough decided to embrace this genre and this particular technology with the Flying Monsters in 3D. So if you could pop your glasses on, let's take a look at Flying Monsters in all its glory.
For 150 million years.
Okay, good stuff. Now, Celia, I thought that David Attenborough was Mr. BBC. So first of all, how did you get him? How did you sign David Attenborough?
Well, actually, it's quite interesting. We had conversations about it, first of all, and then the BBC found out and went absolutely bonkers, as you can imagine. And basically what we were able to talk to Sir David about was that obviously we were able to offer 3D, which the BBC wasn't, and that enabled him to feel comfortable about his relationship with us and the BBC. And obviously, you think about David. He was there from the very early days of the BBC. He was actually a controller of BBC Two. So he was there from live to recorded, from that to black and white to colour, and into HD. So through his lifetime, he has been at the forefront of all leading television technology. So it made complete sense that he should do a 3D project for us. And he's such a genius and such a brilliant mind that he just is the kind of person that wants to embrace risk-taking and new technologies.
And what was it about 3D that attracted him? What was it that made him think it's more than just a marketing gimmick?
I think the ability to bring to life flying at pterosaurs are actually one of his personal passions. So the opportunity to actually bring to life something that he was knowledgeable and passionate about was really, really attractive to him. And I think that the way that you can use 3D to do storytelling has been really extraordinary, and I think there is a screening of it tonight if you want to come and have a long see it at 7 o'clock. But some of the techniques that we were able to employ absolutely develop narrative storytelling in a way that you can't do in 2D. So I think there were lots of reasons, and also it's just really fun doing new stuff, and he's that kind of guy. So,
David, how did David Attenborough adapt to this new way of this new technology? Because anyone that's on camera, having shot in 3D in the past, I found it to be. I love the results, but it can be a very sort of exacting process. It can get a bit Kubrickian after a while with sort of 20 takes just to get the right angle. Now, how did he adapt to this new technology?
Well, he was really motivated by the idea and the idea of bringing the pterosaurs to life. So I think that really carried with him when we were doing this, because as you say, it becomes very much like doing a Kubrick film, retakes. It takes long to set things up, 20 minutes at the minimum to change lenses on the rigs which we were using, heavy kit which were dragging up and down and all that sort of thing. But as soon as he saw on the very first day, he saw the footage which we were capturing and was able to see it in 3D. That really solidified his whole approach to it, and thought, wow, this is going to work. We're really going to bring these alive. And of course, the next stage was then going off and having a look at the CGI and presenting the CGI and creating those worlds, which, as I say there and said earlier, is by looking at the CGI, we really go into that world and we bring those creatures very much alive, and it works so well in this.
My sort of observation from watching The Flying Monsters, I don't know what you thought from that brief clip, but was that when you see the animated stuff, it sort of just gels very naturally with the live action, whereas if you're watching in 2D, then when you see the animation you think, okay, here's the CGI bit, this is the computer stuff. And whereas I think in 3D you go from live action to animation, and I don't think you see the joins, David. I know I'm sort of slightly kicking an open door here because it's what you do, but what do you think about the role of 3D in documentaries? What does it bring, do you think?
Well, it brings a real sense of being there, I think. A bit later on we'll see a clip from a well-told tale in HD, the wildebeest migration. And hopefully when you see that, you'll see it for the first light in a different way. I think that's a good example of 3D giving the viewer a feeling of being there, a real sense of perspective. And yeah, I mean, it's really getting a sense of the depth in each shot that you're doing, and the fact that there are things that sit behind other things that we see every day with our naked eye very clearly, but in 2D HD TV you don't really see it, and that comes alive.
You mentioned, John, David mentioned that there's a retelling of a story we've seen many times, but this new dimension justifies revisiting that territory. How do you feel, overseeing the whole 3D project, about the potential to retell stories that we know because of the level you get?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we recently filmed, and I've talked a lot about the football side of things in the movies, and obviously they're a core part of it. But we recently refilm Matthew Bourne's Swan Lake, which is a very iconic kind of modern interpretation of, probably the most famous ballet in the world. And when I previously ran Sky Arts, and we showed quite an old version of this film in 2D. I think it was recorded on beta originally. I mean, it was like literally, pretty basic. And we've just reshot it, and it is a completely different experience. And sitting in the edit with Matthew Bourne when he saw what it could do in terms of bringing his choreography to life was kind of amazing. So, it took us a while to work out how to do it, how to get the most out of it, but it is absolutely allowing us to tell stories differently and engage audiences in a different way.
Well, I suppose if if 3D is going to sort of win out in the argument about what the future technology will be, then it's going to need to take the great artists with it, I think. Not only James Cameron, but really, really sort of respected filmmakers like Wim Wenders. Now, he has just made a 3D movie, and it's called Pina, which is a dance spectacular. And he's quoted about 3D. He said, I think the other future for 3D is documentary. It can make us discover our planet and its people in an immediate and gripping way. So let's see what he's talking about. Let's take a look at Wim Wenders' Pina in 3D, please. Cyrus, can you explain the extent to which 3D literally gives you a different angles on the subject matter? I mean, I talked to my colleague Mark Aldridge about the fact that football is shot differently now in 3D because up to this point the camera didn't cross the line. You had a sort of side-on view of the pitch, but now you can have a camera where the goalkeeper is, which wouldn't work in 2D. So, but obviously in Factual that's also very much the case. So can you explain about these different angles that hitherto we haven't seen on the screen?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, actually, sport's the best way to explain it. What tends to happen, the way we film sport, is we go down for lower angles, which traditionally we wouldn't do. Whoops, we want to stay quite far away and capture that whole action quite wide. What 3D is allowing you to do is get intimate with what's happening. So you do go in lower. You have that ball coming towards you, or the guys running down the sideline on the rugby, old Chris running and scoring there. So it creates that intimacy. In terms of documentary, what it's doing is it's allowing you to see the space. I think is probably a nice way of describing it. It allows you to. What allows the audience to look at that image and see what else is going on in that space, which also creates an intimacy because you're then allowing your audience to feel as if they're in that space with the people which are being interviewed or the subjects or whatever it is that you're looking at. In terms of angles, I think that in documentary you're always going to want to be tighter with 3D. Because of the limitations of the lenses and all that sort of thing. So it's more about getting in closer rather than radically changing the angles, I would say.
Can you explain what you mean by the fact that you need to be in tighter? Does that demonstrate 3D better, or is it just less challenging to execute?
3D is slightly limited by the technology and the lenses which you can put onto certain rigs and.
Right.
That's it, yeah. If you're wanting to put something that's really far away in the distance, if you're doing landscapes and things, you need to move your eyes very far apart. So it's limited by those sort of things. So if you're doing an interview with someone, or you have somebody like David doing these pieces to camera, you don't want him to be too far away from you. Using wide-angled lenses, we shot most of ours on a 20mm lens, so it's all about being intimate rather than being far away. It also changes the dimension of the 3D. As soon as you start pulling your eyes further and further apart, you start flattening your 3D space out. Because essentially what you're doing with 3D is it's two 2D images which you're laying over each other. So of course when we're closer to something, we see more of that image. When we're further away, we see less of it because it's still working on the same principle as 2D. as in one eye is shooting that side and the other eye is shooting that side.
And I think just on that, I mean, one of the other big differences is the speed at which you cut quite often. And when we did a short film around the royal wedding, we had a few cameras out there which we did in 3D, and I was away when we were basically in the process of signing off the edit. So I was signing it off via an FTP site online in 2D, and it felt agonisingly slow. It just, I mean, I had to call up the guys in the edit suite and say, is there something wrong with this? You know, this is just so slow. What are you looking at? When I got back to the office and watched it in 3D, it was almost too fast because your eyes kind of, you look around the screen much more. You know, you kind of, the TV almost becomes a window, and you hunt around, and it's kind of, you know, you need
a good 3D shot goes a long way, and you'll see an example later of the next film that Sis is making, Penguins, and it's just one shot that's held for a long time, but there's so much going on in that shot that actually you don't need to cut that fast.
No, that's right, because I'm a complete novice on this, on the technical side. But so, David, can you explain to me that, for example, filmmakers shooting in 3D, they don't need the tricks of the trade that a director normally requires, lots of cuts, in order to create a sense of depth and different views and volume, because it's all there anyway. Is that essentially the précis of it?
That's essentially, I mean, as John was saying, the pace of the cut is slow.
Because the director in 2D essentially has to contrive a sort of a 3D feel, just because otherwise it's just flat and, as you say, boring watched, you know, in 2D.
Yes, I mean, you're using the, you know, besides the space that you've achieved in your whole shot, and that's really what you're playing on shot by shot, and much with the depth. So therefore you tend to have a slightly slower edit pace. It does bring up an interesting issue, this, because a lot of 3D programs are also funded by HD channels. It's one way of getting them made, to be honest. So as a producer, you do have this dual sort of mind you have to go into everything, because you have to deliver to an HD channel as well as a 3D channel. And of course, some things in the HD world, the expectation of the audience is much, much higher, because they're used to seeing it every day. So, for example, on some of the larger shoots we're doing, we're having to take an HD crew with us as well as a 3D crew in order to make sure we're getting the right HD shots in 2D. Yes. To make sure that version is right. It's a developing space. I mean, we've got a big experiment tomorrow night, which is going to be quite a public experiment, because we're broadcasting the Isle of Wight Festival live in 3D, but we're also simulcasting it in 2D on Sky Arts at the same time. And
in HD.
Yeah, exactly. So it's basically exactly the same camera, it's exactly the same edit, it's one cut through it, and it's quite, you know, we haven't done that before, but we think we've got a way of doing it brilliantly. And if we don't, I'll be back here next year running the coffee shop.
Fair enough. Worst gigs, I'd say. But does that mean that you can actually shoot? You can shoot with one set of equipment in 2D and 3D. Is that right?
Yeah. If you have a 3D camera, it's effectively two cameras. So if you want it in HD, you just show one of it.
Yeah. And what are the implications for HD as 3D emerges? Will it essentially crowd it out long term, do you think?
No, because 3D is HD anyway, so... you know, everybody talks about, will this crowd this out, and, you know, but everybody said when TV came along, radio would die, it's still alive. Everybody said TV would die when VHS and DVDs and pay. So, you know, there's room for everybody, I think.
Okay, fantastic. Well, let's take a look now at a bit more of Sir David, and let's. I was talking about the effortlessness of the animation, and that you really don't feel you're watching animation. You're having to remind yourselves that, you know, this is a projection of how the dinosaur era looked. But anyway, it's a lovely moment where you take something which is sort of a 3D image really, and it comes into 3D life. It's fantastic. So let's take another look at Flying Monsters, the fossil coming to life.
Mary Anning made one.
Fantastic, I love that. Celia, can you give me some examples then of the sorts of 3D factual content that you have commissioned and are commissioning?
Yeah, can I just talk quickly about that?
Please
I think
do.
That clip that you're seeing is an example to me of how 3D completely transforms and helps storytelling. That would have been quite an average piece of camera, but the ability to actually animate and have that creature in 3D suddenly makes you feel like it's alive and it's an animal, so you immediately have an emotional response to it that you would never have in 2D. And I think, although, you know, the animation in Flying Monsters is genius, David Attenborough's, but one of the things that we collectively learned was actually how simple techniques in 3D can just be so powerful in storytelling. So it's good.
Well, I was involved in I was on a panel for the Royal Television Society in the category of history programs, and a lot of the shows now a lot of the program makers feel that they have to put animation in. They've got to have CGI just to bring some of this history to life for popular history. It's about ratings, I suppose, and actually it was often very cumbersome, and you just felt, I'm going to have to sit through this. This is the CGI bit, and it's just it's just not there in 2D. But in 3D, I don't want to go on about it, but I am actually officially neutral. I mean, because I came to the 3D thing with question marks about it, and there are sort of a lot of cynics, and we may sort of hear from people that have got questions or doubts about 3D even. But anyway, having watched this particular genre of Factual and seeing the contribution, but also how it brings the animated stuff to life is genuinely impressive. So yeah, some
the
yeah.
original question. What are we commissioning? Well, we're working on more David Attenborough projects with Atlantic. So we're making a big film about penguins called Bachelor King, which I think is just going to be amazing. We'll show you a clip in a minute. We're also doing Kew Gardens in 3D. And what's interesting about Kew is that actually the work we did on fossils in Flying Monsters, the revelation to us was that actually filming macro in 3D actually led us to a different creative execution on Kew in 3D. So every time we do something, we learn more and more, and the acceleration of learning creatively and technically.
So tell me a bit about the macro then.
So
close-up.
Yeah, so basically, if you're filming a fossil, it's effectively flat. So you literally got 2 millimeters of relief, and actually, if you film that fossil in 3D, those 2 millimeters of relief suddenly become much more like a living animal. So that was quite a surprise to us all how effective that would be. So then we kind of thought, well, if we're going to do Kew, what is it like if you get really, really close up? So we're actually looking at pollen and seeds in 3D at that level. And it's just extraordinary. They look like planets or creatures from the deep, and it just brings a very completely fresh take on plants. So it has the experiments that we did in Flying Monsters has completely led us down a new creative avenue with Kew. And they're big projects, obviously. And then we're doing Rainforest and Wildebeest with David Electric Sky. We've commissioned a series called Britain and Ireland from the Sky, which is an aerial journey over the whole of Britain and Ireland, which is pretty spectacular. We've done Brian May's Brief History of 3D, which is a documentary about the history of 3D.
Because he's a mega fan, isn't he?
He is a mega fan, yeah, and he is one of the world's biggest stereographic photographic collectors in the world. So it's genuinely knowledgeable and passionate about the subject. So it was brilliant. Having a rock god coming to the channel was fantastic. Even if he did turn up 4.5 hours late for the voiceover recording, true rock god style. But such is life working with these people. And we've just done a pilot for a show that we're doing on Atlantic, and we're in discussions about doing that in 3D. That's a studio-based fact-end format, and we're looking at doing that in 3D. So we're constantly trying to find new areas, new genres, and new ways of bringing content in 3D together.
Yeah.
Well, I'll
just going to add, just in case, because people, if they are interested in doing 3D, we're also going to be co-producing with the likes of Nat Geo, with Discovery, with History. So the World War II piece was with the History Channel. We have a show coming up on Meerkats, which is a Nat Geo co-production. Your pieces are co-production, so we are looking to kind of work with a wide variety of people. So if you have an idea that doesn't naturally fit with a Sky badged channel, but you think would work on Nat Geo or Discovery, then it's definitely worth speaking to them, because if they're excited, they will then come to us to talk about getting into 3D.
Yes, well, very shortly, apart from your questions, we're also going to get into the nuts and bolts of making 3D television, and also getting ideas commissioned, what you guys are actually looking for, and also how challenging it is to do it, budgets, all of that stuff, the real nuts and bolts. So that's next up, actually. But you mentioned, Celia, the forthcoming Britain and Ireland from the Sky. So if we've done our specs, let's enjoy Britain from an aerial point of view. Insane.
The helicopter pilot and the cameraman The helicopter pilot has been doing aerial photography for 20 years. He said he's never been so shit scared in his life.
Yeah, that would be right.
And I also think that's example. You know, a year ago we would never have been able to have executed something like that, air-to-air 3D filming.
Why not?
Well, everybody would have gone, oh my god, it will never work. It's too difficult. The rig is too heavy. The mountings don't work. And so, you know, again, it's another example of how it's just so fast, the development. And also I think, you know, a lot of early 3D is, you know, it's very beautiful lyrical landscapes, and so I'm trying to encourage people to bring a bit of punk to it, a bit of spirit, and.
I mean, how did it go? How was it to make that footage? Was it
It was remarkably. It was
tricky?
remarkably. The actual filming of it was remarkably straightforward as far as 3D ever is straightforward. I mean, it's slightly misleading to say that shooting in 3D is straightforward. It's complicated and it's difficult, but actually. They did, and also in that they filmed from the aeroplane, and they filmed from car rigs, and they also had a pole cam on top of a bicycle. So they used a variety of different, but the whole is just moving the whole time. So it's sort of it's an experimental series that has sort of opportunities to try lots of different things out a little bit. So.
Does that sort of fill you with terror sometimes when you look at the material that you need to get, but you have the added pressure that it's going to be in 3D, and there's that question mark over how, you know, if something goes wrong? We've yet to try do an ob-doc, partly because the cameras are big and heavy and it's quite difficult to be spontaneous in 3D because it takes a while for setups, all that kind of stuff. So I think that is the kind of the next thing for me, is like, how would you do ob-docs in 3D? Because I think if you can bring ordinary real life in 3D, I think that would be extraordinary, rather than a much more sort of controlled and measured. I mean, even wildlife is obviously real life, but you are able to actually position a camera and capture things walking in front of you. Whereas, I don't know, if you were doing an ob-doc on, I can't think, what, a hospital or something, then it presents a whole different range of difficulties. I mean, Cyrus, can you tell me some of the technical issues? We've heard that the equipment is heavy, setting shots up takes quite a while. So, you know, what are the physical issues surrounding shooting in 3D?
It's lens changes, the technology.
Does it break? Does it just stop
it's
working
really
every so often?
temperamental.
Well,
It can be.
It can be, yeah. I mean, you're using two cameras, so you've got double the jeopardy in a way.
Doubling the risk.
And isn't there normally a very sort of hyper intelligent 3D super guru sitting there with
Stereographer.
the stereographer? Is that what they're called? And they're the ones that have to watch it all going and saying, no, you've got to do it again, didn't look right.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. They controlling the I/O, the convergence, the parallax. They talking to the director and the DOP about what it is that you want to bring alive in that specific scene and how that's going to work in the narrative. I mean, the thing with 3D is that there's limitations, but there's also not limitations. The challenge with it is that you're always shooting with two cameras, and if one goes down, you don't have 3D. You've got 2D essentially.
If it goes wrong, it goes badly wrong. And also because you can't just call up another HD camera and it'll be there like that.
And it's not recoverable. Lots of things can be fixed in post, but one of the cameras going down, it's game over.
It's about planning. I think that's the other thing, is that, you know, for Flying Monsters, we completely storyboarded the whole thing, and it was much more akin to making a movie than it would be a normal documentary. So it's lots and lots and lots and lots of planning, recce's, you know. And so if you are trying to capture something that's a one-off thing, you absolutely know where you're going to put your camera and where you expect the action to happen.
I want to get further down the line into the debate about the reputation of 3D, public attitudes to 3D. But I'm wondering whether some of the skepticism about 3D comes from Hollywood and perhaps the tendency by Hollywood to slap 3D onto the poster in the hope of selling a few more tickets, when actually all they might have done is retrofitted a movie that was originally, you know, shot and conceived in 2D, like perhaps Clash of the Titans or one or two others as notorious examples of that. So tell me, David, about 3D being done badly and the fact that, you know, it gives the whole technology a bit of a bad name.
Well, I think we sort of got through it, really. I mean, there has been some pretty bad 3D around. I'm sure there still is, but I think cinema has more of a reputation, perhaps of bad 3D, than necessarily TV does, because TV is very recently, as we well know, just come onto the scene. I think is in a much better position to be a a much better filter for 3D TV and what's good and what's bad. There's a lot already been learnt about it, and as new 3D networks set up, they are going to be approached, I think, predominantly what is with good 3D.
What do you look out for in terms of potential pitfalls? I mean, in the shooting of a motion picture, it seems to be that, to avoid the cliches of lots of columns and lots of stuff, being thrown at the screen and all that sort of, those sort of really hack things that people do or used to do to demonstrate, oh look, this is 3D, so we better demonstrate that. But what are the pitfalls in television, making a factual show in 3D, apart from the technical issues?
I think it's just, it's just picking the wrong subject. Really. It's, you're trying to make a 3D show out of a subject that should never really be made as a 3D show. I think if you've got a good story and it's got opportunities to apply the 3D skill and sort of visual skill to it, then you're onto something. But you must have a good story in the first place. I think some people are coming at it the other way around, and then you haven't got a show. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we basically say, the first rule of 3D is you forget about 3D. You have to have a story, a cast. The simples of storytelling do not change. Basically a crap show is a crap show in 3D. It doesn't make any difference, kind of thing. But once you've got what you think is the makings of a good show, then you kind of really think very, very hard about, can you do it in 3D? You storyboard the entire thing, and it may be that the genre you're looking to work in, if it is an old stock or whatever, it's just too difficult right now. I've no doubt that 2 years' time people will be making very great old stocks very effectively. But it's not forgetting the basics and not getting too caught up in the technology or those.
I think what sort of excites me as somebody that has made documentaries at the idea of 3D is just that a lot of the pretty shots that you get when you do a sort of travel log type documentary, all of those GVs, and also if your subject matter is inherently visual, as my series about extraordinary people, a lot of those shows were about people's physical attributes, and the idea of doing that in 3D is just, it's, as I say, it feels, unfortunate we can't roll back time and do that, because it really feels like it would bring added value. But as Sky's approach is pan-genre in terms of its commitment to 3D, are there examples of programs, of content that you think doesn't need to be in 3D? And what would you leave off the list? You mentioned that there are, criterion as to what you need to have, a story and a narrative, structure. But what do you think doesn't need to be in 3D?
I don't know. I mean, to be honest, at the moment we're more about getting shows on air than thinking about what we wouldn't need to get there. I mean, I think at the moment it's really about some of the technical limitations are stopping us doing some types of shows. In terms of scripted, we are not pushing into scripted as fast as we're pushing into other areas, just simply because we already do, through the movies we have scripted content on air, and it's $100 million budgets, and it looks pretty amazing. So if you're going to try and compete with that, it's pretty tight. But it's really more at the moment just thinking about what really does work for 3D.
What do you think, Celia? Are there is there a danger that when people pitch to you, they think they might catch your eye if they stick the word 3D on top of the
I think for me it's about passion as well, and I think that it's about working with the kind of people who are well educated in 3D, and I think if you just stick 3D on it and hope that that's going to get you a commission, it's not. You do have to know a little bit, and obviously we don't expect everybody to know because not many people do know. So, but it is about doing good research. It's about talking to the right people. We can help with that. We have masses of expertise within our building and also the partners that we work with. So we don't expect everybody to be up there, but we do expect people to have sort of taken a responsible approach to knowing something about what it is to make 3D.
So what are you looking for? What's the kind of stuff that excites you when it lands on your desk? Because we have people out there that with hundreds of ideas, and they want to know perhaps how to funnel these various ideas.
I think the big challenge for us is, we're doing some amazing, brilliant stuff, particularly with these two chaps here. And I think it's just how do we get past those kind of big, epic, natural history, very expensive content, and how do we actually start making 3D content in a more kind of traditional level of budget that you would expect for a digital channel. So I think that's the next big challenge. And obviously we're very content hungry, so we need to work out a way of making good 3D on kind of more traditional budgets, and I think that's the big thing I'm looking for. And also volume. We have a lot of, I mean, a 3D channel is by necessity something, it's a special event. You know, you are going to come to it for special events, but it is also about providing series rather than one-offs. And so that's kind of, I think, for us is the next sort of big area that we're looking for. But
Okay.
we're quite content, you know, we're quite subject agnostic. And I think that's the joy of the 3D channel, is that also the more variety of content that we can offer, the richer the viewer experiences. So we're quite agnostic about what it is.
Do you have a perception as to what it is the audience would like to have in 3D in a factual context?
I think basically it's that wow moment of when you sit down and you just kind of go, wow, that's amazing, or wow, that's beautiful. And I think it's the combination of that wow factor plus really strong storytelling. And I think if you have those two together, the audience will actually forget or become unaware of the nature of 3D and actually engage with the material in an incredibly intimate manner. And I mean, I have a 3D TV at home, obviously, and I watch 3D with my kids. And it's quite extraordinary how they engage with the material in a way that they don't when we're just watching, you know. They don't hit each other on the head and whack down, they sit there and, you know. So it's special.
How about budgets and the cost of the whole thing? I mean, it's, you know, I
We
shudder
don't
to
talk,
think.
we don't talk about budgets.
But
what,
you know,
we
when
sort
people,
of say it's
when
a
people are pitching,
30% uplift, don't we? I mean, it's
about
sort
yeah. I
of,
mean, it varies. To be honest, it varies hugely. I
courses
mean,
for courses, it
depends on what the show is. I mean, in some instances, it's literally a few percent more, and that's generally sort of OB-driven things. But you know, other shows it can be quite a significant increase. So, but I think where we are is we're looking for great ideas, and it's going to be the idea that drives the show. And as we've shown, you know, through projects like with these guys, if it's a good show, we will back it.
do you have to laugh inwardly, both of you, David and Size, at the idea of getting those costs down? Do you feel that 3D is inherently, you know, an expensive creature, and that any hope that it'll be a competitive way of shooting television is a bit of a pipe dream?
No, it's not inherently expensive. It's inherently expensive if you do it in a certain way. And you go off and you use certain types of rigs, and you then need to lay your crew and all the extras that you bring to it, which you wouldn't in a traditional documentary. But you can go out and you can buy a camera for £500, and it's called a GoPro. You can mount it on the front of your bicycle or your surfboard.
you can actually get hold of one in Britain at the moment.
I've got
Which
two on sale
manufacturer?
too.
Which manufacturer does the, is that the
They
brand?
call
GoPro.
GoPro out in America.
Sounds
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. So, but they're not going to work for everything. So you need to work out your narrative again. But it depends on the type of program that you're making. Just like anything. I mean, if you're making a feature film for $5 million, it's not going to be the same as making it for $300 million. You're going to get a completely different result. But both of them rely on the one thing, which is the narrative, and driving that story, whether it's at the lower budget or the higher budget.
I mean, I think it's a myth that you need to have loads of money to be able to get into 3D. I mean, it's interesting, you know, you three, you know, from a Brighton base had what, 3 series already run on US TV in 3D? I mean, it's
One of which actually is using a lot of lightweight cameras. Actually, is to pick up on Science's point. It doesn't have to be heavy, big rigs all the time.
How far away are we from, you know, a little crack squad of cameramen, sound guys, perhaps presenter, producer, out on the field in an environment like a war zone in 3D?
Not far, I'd
Now,
say. Yeah.
you could do it tomorrow.
Yeah, there's Sony are coming out with a new range of camera, which will help that.
yeah.
Does that excite you as you know, heading the sort of 3D project of Sky? Does that excite you very much as being the way forward?
Well, on the basis that it was done in Hitler's time, we'll be able to do it.
Yeah.
You know, we're
We've
able to
got
do it.
Ross Kemp in
quite
Afghanistan at the
literally,
moment, so you know,
Shooting in 3D,
not just 3D, but we're looking
but he's
at
there and brilliant. Wow, that's amazing. So okay, fantastic. And finally, quick word on the crew then. So could you just take me through numbers, or does it vary depending on how you're shooting?
It varies. If you're going to go and shoot on a little GoPro, it's going to be yourself, and it's ideal to have a stereographer there, so that you can sort out all the problems before you get to post. Because the big thing with 3D is plan, and plan again. It's all about working out what the shot needs to be and how that shot is going to tell the story. The challenge for 3D, as John was saying about cutting, is not only are you doing that with your pictures when you cut, but you're doing that as well. your eye takes 3 seconds to go between a cut. That sounds like an awfully long time. It's trying to do quite a lot, your eye. So if you start making fast cuts, you need to flatten your 3D. So it depends on how you're doing it and what you're doing. If you're doing something like we did, then you need 30 people to be moving stuff around.
I've always thought, recently with technology, 2D camera technology, one of the sort of burdens of it, I don't know what you think, is the tendency to overshoot, because now the tapes are so compact and they go on forever, and you can come home with 100 hours and yet doesn't get any easier in the edit when you've got to sift through that. And so do you think it's almost a bit old school now, because in 3D you do have to, like in the old days when you've got a limited amount of tape, and tape being expensive and cumbersome, that you had to really decide what you were going to do, what you were going to shoot, and work very smart?
The discipline in 3D is quite incredible. And actually, as a company, we're making 2D programs, I think, a lot better now, because we've been making 3D.
That culture of rationalising every shot. And
Everyone's
frame.
doing a better job. And right the way through the production team, there's a lot more better planning, better scheduling, and even the directors are looking at things differently, and because of the experience they've had in 3D.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Brilliant. Well, look, we're coming very close now to our sort of group chat. Let's take a look at the story of the wildebeest. It normally turns out quite grisly for them, so let's have a look in 3D. Great stuff. Before we open questions to the floor, then I just have a note really on this running order about the future and about what's next. So we've sort of touched on it, I think, quite sort of heavily. So starting with Cyrus, what do you think in terms of the way forward, the kind of content and also the kind of execution of 3D?
Well, I think we'll see more and more factual programs made in 3D. Where it goes, the technology is constantly shifting, albeit not quite as quickly as we'd like it to shift, but rigs are getting smaller. There's a rig out at the moment called the Atom, which is tiny. They're using it to shoot features on. That'll make it a lot easier to do documentary in the terms that we're used to doing it. Uptake, I think there's a genuine excitement around 3D. The beginning of the year, or at the end of last year, there was figures bandied about it as to how many tellies, and actually they've exceeded those sales. So I think that there's a real appetite out there. And it's very different to going to the cinema. I mean, the cinema experience, there's essentially two types of cinema experience. It's animation for children, or it's high octane action flicks for men and boys. Where's the rest of the audience? Whereas telly is bringing something else to that. So I think that there's definitely a life here, and there's definitely a lot of blood in these veins, and it's only going to get bigger and stronger. BBC's doing Wimbledon. I mean, this is what's going to drive it. As soon as we get more and more players out there, it's going to drive the market forward. Yeah.
Is there any frustration from the public that they've got to go and buy another telly now? They've invested in HD, which was fantastic, but then they've got to get a 3D. I mean, is this difficult in the winning hearts and minds in terms of 3D?
There's a little bit of it, but I think clearly, if you've just gone and bought yourself a big HD telly and you want to watch 3D, you do have to buy a 3D TV. But one of the misconceptions that's out there, because we researched these things very carefully, is that everybody thinks that a 3D telly is going to cost them £3,000, £5,000. When you ask someone what does it cost, those are the two numbers that come up time and again. And yet TVs like this these are very good TVs, but they're probably £900. But you can go to Curry's in town here, and you can pick up a very decent Samsung telly for about 750 quid. And quite often you have a Blu-ray DVD player chucked in on a deal. So that's pretty competitive with an HD set. So what we're seeing is that people are, when they go to Curry's to upgrade their telly, they're kind of seeing that for an extra £100 they could get 3D as well. So they're kind of doing that to future-proof. So that's how the sort of purchasing is going.
Great. Well, let's take some questions from the floor now. Thanks for listening so patiently. I'm sure you've got loads of views boiling over, ready to go. So does anyone have a question for the panel? Yes?
Is this working? Yes, okay. I've got a question. My name is Rudolf Herzog. I've got a question concerning the aerial shots. I'm just mystified what the rig looks like. Is it the other two cameras mounted on individual gyroscopes, or is it one thing, and how big is it, and how far are the cameras apart?
Well, I can't tell you how far the cameras are apart. I wasn't on the shoot, but there'll be two cameras stuck together, and it was on a rig. I don't know, to be honest with you, technically what the name of the rig was. CS probably know more about it, because we use the same helicopter company for the aerial shots in Flying Monsters, so maybe you can help me on that.
Yeah, it's a C-stab rig, and the cameras are mounted on the rig, and it sits at the front of the helicopter and swivels, not on a gyroscope as such. No, it's more fixed than a gyro would be. The distance apart isn't very far apart at all, but they can use longer lenses on those because they're not limited by mirrors and that sort of thing. So you can get more out of those shots.
But what's interesting in the time between when you used that helicopter and now, you only basically had 10 minutes and then you had to stop, didn't you?
Yeah.
Whereas now they film for like hours and hours and hours, which is why we're able to cover vast amounts of countryside in one trip kind of thing.
Okay, good stuff. Any other questions for the panel?
I wonder, I think we've got one more clip, haven't we? The Bachelor
Yeah, we actually do, yes. So it would be very nice to take a look at that. And I can tell you that this is, well, can you tell me a little bit about it? I'm going to flag up the fact that it's not quite the full graded end product yet, is it? It's but can you just a word on Bachelor King prior to the clip, please?
Bachelor King is it's a documentary film about penguins in South Georgia, and I think what we're trying to do with it, we're trying to move it on from being a natural history film. So it's a combination of using the awesome beauty of the landscape, but with quite a feature film, dramatic storyline based around characters. And it's basically the story of a young bachelor penguin and his search for love, his marriage and birth of his first child. And we're just trying to bring fantastic storytelling to what is traditionally a life cycle natural history doc. So this is just footage. And you'll see, I mean, I always have a saying that, a good 3D shot goes a long way, and you'll see in this how actually a really good 3D shot can last for ages and ages and ages. Have a look. But it's early, it's rushes, it's not finished and all that kind of stuff.
Fantastic stuff. I mean, it's a funny one you were saying about that you need to shoot relatively close up to really get the value from the 3D, but I noticed watching the royal wedding and also some of those shots that involve a lot of animals, that you do get more volume with 3D, don't you? Even from a distance, you do get that sense, the depth of the shot, which for this sort of material is absolutely priceless, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you get a sense of more depth, but what's creating that sense of depth is that there's something in the foreground, and that's it's visual cues basically. So that then leads your brain to make your eyes think that you're seeing something which has a fuller depth.
So if you have a shot of the royal wedding which involves several thousand people in a crowd, you need the people at the front waving to create the backdrop.
Yeah, or not necessarily waving. If you're shooting it with a perspective, so you've got people closer to you here, and then people further away, your mind's able to read the sizes. That's essentially what it is, because your brain is so used to seeing things in the real world and knows the size of things. So it's setting up those eye-accessing cues, really.
Is there a danger of a Betamax versus VHS in terms of what manufacturers are actually producing? So what is the sort of the number one technology if someone's thinking about buying a telly? What's your call as to where we're going to be at? Is it going to be these sort of glasses with ever improving screens? I know that there are these glasses that are battery operated, where a lot of the 3D stuff's happening within the glasses.
Yeah.
So where does the land lie in terms of where's it going to go?
In basic terms, there's two different. I mean, if you're thinking about getting a telly, there's two choices you have. You can either buy what's called a passive set, which is the sets that you've been watching this footage on with these kind of fairly cheap glasses, or you can buy an active TV, which is one that has slightly heavier They're battery operated and they operate a slightly different way. But
And they cost 60 quid a pop.
They do cost about 60 quid a pop. They're pretty expensive. I mean, we as a company, I mean, basically it's completely down to Sky customers what TV they buy. Our box supports any type of 3D telly, but generally we've found through research and our own experience that this is a better way because, frankly, if you sit on it or your kids break it, you're less likely to, you know, fall out with them forever if it's a £60 pair of glasses, and the overall viewing experience is, I think, better.
Question at the front, so.
Fair bit of talk about the end user, i.e. how much televisions cost, but from a production point of view, I mean, our company went tapeless 3 years ago, switched to HD 3 years ago. BBC are now doing Wimbledon, Sky are HD 3D. Should we be early adopters, or should we wait to see how the landscape pans out for medium to small indies who want to get involved in 3D?
Probably fair. Yeah. Guys at the sharp end.
As we were saying earlier, I think the acquisition technology, the camera technology is moving very fast, and by the end of this year there'll be, you know, a range of quite low cost, very simple to use cameras coming onto the market that would, I think, most probably be meeting, you know, the tech specs of broadcasters. So from that point of view, it's getting simpler very, very quickly. The one area that you can really underestimate on is post, and that's I know Avid are now very seriously looking at a 3D system within the Avid system. We worked extensively on a system called Mystica, which Sky have, which is excellent. It's very fast, but it's very easy to underestimate the time that takes. And I think it will get easier. There'll be better post system, well, not better, but simplest post systems coming out that will be more in line with what editors are used to. So it will get easier, but it's still, at this point in time, it still really takes quite a lot of serious investment and skill set to make good 3D. But that will change very quickly. Literally, we're talking within this year, it will begin to move very quickly.
And Celia, would you recommend the mindset shift towards 3D for producers?
I think if it genuinely lights your fire, if you get excited about it, if it makes you feel creative, then do it. And I think that it's, you know, if you're frightened of it, then the best way to avoid that is by talking to people who are doing it already. I think there's quite a lot of smoke and mirrors about 3D. I mean, it is difficult, but more and more people are knowing how to do it. More and more people are willing to share their experience. And I think if you really fancy it, have a go. You know, we're here to help you. You know, we've got loads of connections. We can advise you. So you know, I wouldn't not do it if it's something that you feel passionate about.
What do you think? I mean, does it excite you, or does it feel like a bit of a headache, and that's sort of the instinct to see how it plays out for the next year or two?
The latter. It excites me, but I think I would rather wait and just see how it evolves, purely from a technology point of view, with the, as you said, the new kit coming out now, smaller rigs, and the sort of...
But you don't have to buy it, you can hire it all. So, you know, the investment that you need to make is in doing the research and finding the right partners to work with, and a certain amount of production skill. But in terms of kit, you just hire it all. So, you know, it shouldn't actually be that investment heavy for a company to get into 3D.
Good luck with it. She wants it. Let's make some 3D, fella. Can I take a question from the lady at the back?
Hi. Just got a question about smart TVs. How is 3D going to fit into the sort of smart TVs that are supposed to be coming out? I don't know what your opinion about smart TVs.
Do you know about smart TVs?
To be honest, I think you probably should be asking the guys from Sony or Samsung. I mean, we're sort of making the shows and putting them out, but I don't know if CS or...
Do you have any idea? What is a smart TV?
Well, smart TV is basically it's basically an internet connection at the back of the TV, where you don't need a box. So it's this sort of thing, and then I'm sort of kind of confused with what's coming out, like with all this, you know, HD and smart TV. Basically, you just plug in the internet connection at the back of the TV.
And certainly, on smart TVs, there will be companies offering 3D on video on demand.
So it's included in the actual
which
TV
I believe
itself.
those apps, as they will be on the smart TV, and even the manufacturers are offering, will be offering 3D on video on demand platforms on the smart TV.
All right.
It'll come down to a rights position as
Yeah.
well. So, it's a complicated.
In what way?
landscape.
What do you mean?
But you're wondering whether the 3D is built into the technology of a smart
Yes.
TV, aren't you?
How that's I don't know whether it's a switch or something that you can turn on. I just wanted to sort of see what the opinion about, the 3D and the HD and the smart TVs, which is obviously the internet sort of.
It's,
it's all very complicated.
This week, Sony announced that they are releasing a computer at the end of the year, which will be 3D and touchscreen. So smart TV will be that close behind it. It's here. LG has brought out a tablet which is Anaglyph 3D. Apple's bringing out a 3D phone.
Nintendo
Is it
it's
already
here.
3D the Nintendo, is it?
without
Yeah.
glasses.
Yeah.
So the 3D is actually getting integrated in the existing sort of technology that's coming
Yeah.
out, basically.
Yeah.
It's like an
Yeah.
extra sort of thing.
Yeah.
What do you? Oh, there's a question. What do you all think about 3D? I mean, when you arrived here today, did you have suspicions about it, or where does the land lie for you guys in terms of 3D being the future? Do you think it's a given that it's going to be 3D at a certain point? There'll be a tipping point where you've got to have it. What do you think, madam?
Hi, I saw some figures in the paper at the weekend about Kung Fu Panda 2 in 3D, and I think it was showing for the first time that the 2D was actually gaining ground on the 3D, or had even taken over. I mean, is that
What
worrying?
in theatres
in
at
box
cinemas?
office, yeah.
Mm.
That
Yeah.
people were kind of
Well-
turning against it. I mean, are you worried about that? Or
I
is
think what ultimately you have to put your trust in viewers, and because viewers are smart, they know exactly what they're doing. They can turn over or not go to the cinema at a moment's notice. It's entirely down to their choice. And I think that what Hollywood's perhaps done is got slightly carried away by the fact that for good 3D films, it has been able to whack an extra third on the ticket price, and people will go in their droves to watch those films and come out going, that's amazing. But that kind of level of satisfaction doesn't apply to bad films. I mean, a bad film in 2D is a bad film in 3D. 3D is not the cure. And I think that there's an increasing number of people in Hollywood who are recognising that and are trying to work through it, because, there have been a couple of 3D films that haven't grossed as much as perhaps people thought they might, but equally they haven't been well received by critics because they're not very good. The story's no good. I mean, it's a bad film's a bad film.
Do you think, but does that mean that they would then choose the 2D version? I mean, does that explain why more people are choosing to see it in 2D?
Well, in quite a lot of instances, they're choosing not to watch it at all because it's a bad film.
Would you, if you had a choice, would you watch it in 2D or 3D?
It depends on the film, I think, to be honest. And
Yeah.
if I heard a bad review, then maybe.
What's happened with the Hollywood model is, as I was alluding to earlier, that the majority of the content is male orientated. So what happens for most of the female audience, they get dragged along to go and see an action flick with their boyfriend or their husband or brother or whoever, which puts them off the experience in that cinematic experience. So when they then take the kids along to go and see a film, they think, There's also a concern amongst a lot of the female audience about what 3D is going to do to children. That's why we've seen a slight drop in the whole Kung Fu Panda animation type thing. There's no evidence that says that it's bad at all. I think as the content changes and as we get more content on the small screen, where the content can be more diverse, you'll then start having people coming back to the 3D in droves, I would say.
I also think with Kung Fu Panda, it's quite young skewing. I've got two kids, a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, and it's quite hard for my 3-year-old to keep a pair of glasses on. I mean, we actually have children's 3D glasses at home because it's really difficult for them to keep the big ones on. So I think actually getting a 3-year-old to engage with a movie at that length in the cinema is, I don't know if people go to take their young kids to cinema, but it's not easy. So when you've got glasses on top, and if they take the glasses off, they can't engage with the film so much. So I think if you have young children, just the notion of trying to keep a kid entertained without keeping their glasses on, you might go 2D. But
What do you think might be the game changer for 3D? That it's on track, clearly. Uptake for the hardware is growing, but it's not a given that we'll all be watching 3D in 5 years' time. What do you think the game changer could be? Is it going to be something like the next World Cup? Or what chance does Factual have of being the genre that makes 3D a must-have?
I think what's quite interesting, I think also with some of the big projects we've been doing, like Flying Monsters, that actually has a theatrical or a cinema release. And I think that actually bringing Factual into the theatre will engage with a different audience on 3D. So I think that it's really, really early days. But I think if you look at the impact 3D has had on Hollywood revenues, I mean it is here to stay. It is an incredibly powerful creative tool, and I think people will watch more and more of it. But we've got to give them more and more 3D to watch, and I think that's the thing at the moment. We've only been, the channel isn't even a year old, and any channel is young, but we're a young channel with young technology. So it's going to take us time to build a fully fledged channel.
Definitely. Okay, we're running slightly out of time, so I'll take a question from the back.
Hi there. I have both a comment and a question. I think part of what will kind of help the development along is both like user-generated content as prices drop on cameras and so on. People can try it out themselves and understand it better and see what they've done on their TV screens as a whole. And another thing is, of course, like devices that use auto-stereoscopic screens for children. They already have the Nintendo DS 3D thing, and they play along it, and they get used to the 3D
So
experience.
you think 3D will come in through the back door via smaller devices like a play?
Gaming.
I think it will have a big effect. Yeah, it's like new generations taking over.
It's true. I mean, to what extent would being able to shoot in 3D on the iPhone, which is probably only a couple of iPhones away? What you really think is the next one? Yeah. What influence might that have in terms of, just the popular psyche and attitudes to 3D? It'd be great for you guys to shoot half your stuff on the phone.
It makes I mean, I have a 3D stills camera at home, and it's just really good fun, and it's it has the same, when we take it out and let people play with it, it's the same impact. When I was a kid, we had Polaroid cameras, and it was just like uber cool. It was really good fun, and 3D cameras, stills camera, I mean, it's just it's just like a normal stills camera, and people love it, and they just play with it, and they suddenly get really creative, and they start taking all sorts of pictures and engaging with the creative process that they probably wouldn't if I just gave them my Canon. So I think there's all sorts of opportunities that we just haven't even got to yet.
So any other questions before
Yeah,
we wrap up?
I had a short question.
Oh
as
yeah,
well.
go for it. Cool, sorry.
Something completely different. From a producer's point of view, I would be scared to end up having to cut 2 versions or shoot 2 versions and so on. Like, how would you solve that issue? Is that an issue?
No, not necessarily. You don't shoot two versions because you're shooting 2D, just in 2 different cameras.
Yeah,
so
we were talking about like the speed and the...
Yeah, so what you do is you do your edit in your 3D edit and then go back and have a look at it for 2D. So it's kind of like doing a versioning where you then drop in shots and put more cuts in.
And you budget for 2 versions.
Yeah, you budget in your
if we ask you to deliver 2 different versions, then we expect you to budget for that delivery.
Okay, great stuff. And I think we have a question from the lady at the front.
Hello. Kind of similarly, it was a comment and a question. Firstly, when you were asking about what's the view of 3D, I mean, I went and saw Avatar, and then I went and saw Charlie Willy Wonka, the 3D, Tim Burton version, and both of them was a bit like, meh, that's whatever kind of thing. But watching the fossil come to life and it actually being a story is what's actually got me thinking like, oh, if TV's only 900 quid, and I think it's things like that that's going to encourage it more than these big Hollywood films. And similarly to what the lady was saying, I think for Sky, it's quite the cross-platform promotion of your commissions is really important. And is the technology allowing you to do things on the net as well? And how long do you guys think it is before, like you were saying with the cameras and stuff, where you can just sort of be putting things on YouTube in 3D, and I don't know if you know if technology allows for that yet.
You can put stuff on YouTube right now. The challenge with that is how your audience watches it. And the only way to watch stuff on your normal computer is to go back to the old red and green anaglyph classes, unless you've got a 3D screen. And there's one or two laptops which have come out with 3D screens, but you can put 3D stuff up there now.
Fantastic. Okay, one last question, I think.
Another technical question. I didn't see an awful lot of crane shots. Maybe I wasn't watching well enough, but are crane shots possible in 3D, and what do they look like?
Come to the Isle of Wight
Second, very small. Another question is fast movement when you do the dance things. Is that irritating to the eye, or what's your experience with very fast movement in the foreground?
Crane shots are doable, and it just depends on which rig you're using as to what crane you need to use. And essentially, what it's doing is you're seeing the full perspective, whereas on your 2D shot, everything's flattening off as you're going. With your 3D shot, if you imagine looking over the edge of a cliff, that's what happens with your crane shot. So you get that full feel of the perspective. In terms of movement, this is one of the big debates at the moment, and especially out in Hollywood. James Cameron is shooting his next film at, I think, 98 frames to get rid of the movement, or not the movement problems, it's kind of a strobing problem. So of course movement is also going to create that strobing problem. So yes, our pans or tracks across things like in our penguins and also on the flying monsters are very slow. We purposefully keep an eye on that because you can get a strobing type effect because the screens can't refresh quick enough.
But there's a film out at the moment about the TT races, which is a motorbike race that happens on the Isle of Man. And that's incredibly fast because it's motorbikes going 150 miles an hour. So, it's possible. And as I keep saying, literally every 6 months, more and more stuff is possible.
So could you raise your hands if you are convinced about 3D? And if you're not, I'm neutral, obviously.
If you don't, said not, why not?
Oh God.
Not the cameraman.
He's a 2D cameraman.
I'm not sure really. I just feel it's still got that gimmick value to it. I'm not sure if it's going to stay around for so long. Actually, I was going to ask a question, and it was really related to the trend that's going on in the gaming market at the moment, where rather than tricking your eyes into seeing 3D with glasses, they're more concentrating on actually being in a 3D space. And I was wondering if that's sort of, you had any influence on you at Sky, or think about how you can utilise that technology with your experiences.
Is that a question about technique, do you think, rather than technology? Is that what you're getting at?
Well, it's sort of both really, because obviously with devices like the Wii and the one that just announced, which is the Wii U.
You feel they've got a 3D quality because of how they've composed?
I think it's more immersive because it puts the user into the actual environment rather than tricking your eyes into. Because obviously, for me, the whole immersive experience is I have to put glasses on in order to watch this. Whereas with something like the Microsoft Kinect, you're actually in that 3D space. So I think the reason why I find it very hard to believe or not see it as a gimmick is the fact that I have to utilise this technology in order to get into that experience.
I mean, I think without a doubt we're at a kind of staging post in technology's development, and if you think about how TV has developed throughout time, it's always been trying to get closer to reality. So from black and white with sound to colour, analog. It's always been that kind of push to get closer to reality. And I would imagine that 5-10 years from now, there's going to be something completely immersive. I mean, I have no idea where it's going to go, but I can only imagine it will get closer to that fully immersive experience. So I think we're at relatively early days with 3D. As Celia said, we've only been on air for 8 months, but the technology is moving even quicker than we thought it would. I mean, at NAB, which is the big kind of technology fair that happens in the States each year. Our guys who are immersed in all this world were like stunned by the number of 3D cameras that were coming through, the new technologies, the pace at which glasses-free TV is coming through. So, you know, to be absolutely honest, none of us know exactly where it's going, but we think it's going to an exciting place, which is why we're prepared to be in it early and stay in it for the long term.
What do you, chaps, David and Silas, what do you say on that sort of technical level in terms of the way gaming is designed
just
and the
picking up
graphics
on,
of it?
Pick up on the question. You're looking at a 3D space, but you're actually only still seeing that in 2D.
Yeah.
As a viewer, and I think hopefully today might have seen a difference when you actually see something in 3D, seeing it in 3D. And I think that's the difference between, there's a lot of 3D computer graphics out there, but we're still watching it in 2D. And I think that's the difference we're talking about. Yeah, I mean, picking up, as I said before, on John's point, it's only going to get easier. I mean, I was in America last week with a 3D channel, and they were saying maybe in 18 months they called it's just going to be plug and play. That's the expression they use. And I was here who sort of pioneered it and been at it at the front. Almost would be a pretty depressing thing to watch, actually. Producers coming on and literally plugging in and playing almost. And it will get a lot easier very quickly.
Fantastic, great. Well, I want to thank you sincerely for. Oh, you do have a question. Do we have time for one more question, Mark? Mark's in charge. One more, brilliant. Okay, last final question. Brilliant, and that's from you, madam.
Yeah. It's not. I'm not a detractor because I love the latest 3D films that I've seen, but I kind of think that you might be chasing a dream that's not true. Because I don't think when I go and see a 3D film that actually I'm getting closer to reality. I think I'm reminded more than ever that it is an artificial construct in front of me. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but I just wondered what you thought about that. I mean, for example, the little clip that you showed us with the skeleton rising up, I think there's a tendency to create magic for us. And it reminded me more than anything of Hogwarts and Harry Potter, and not actually something that is real. And that it reminded me more than anything that I was with a whole load of other people being given an experience.
That's very fair. Fair comment. You know what I would say? I know you guys will frown at that, but I tweeted before I came here asking what people thought of 3D, and you know, there's an awful lot of negative associations with it. You know, from maybe it's for people that haven't got the technology and haven't been convinced yet. But anyway, what do you think of that view? Is it Hollywood giving 3D a bad name? What do you think?
I think that 3D has had a bad name for a long time. We came out of the 70s where we had Jaws 3D and Anaglyph, and the arm came out of the screen, and we walked away from that, and it died a death and went away because the audience walked away from it. In terms of how we've put Flying Monsters together, yes, it is really a Harry Potter in many ways, because we're bringing things which no longer exist back to life, and I think it's where it suits the narrative. That's where we need to employ those tasks, just as we would in normal 2D filmmaking. Where it comes to doing something like the wildebeest trek or the penguins, I think it really gives a different mood and feel to what's happening on that stage. The shot which I talk about is the one where you see the elephant seals rutting in the background, and the penguins feel as if they're there, or we're there with them. So I think it does lend itself to an intimacy. Of course, there's going to be people which are going to find it hard to jump to 3D, just like in any format change. It takes a while for things to sort of be taken into the public domain, and for it to get better as well, and to be delivering at a certain level. I think Hollywood is not answerable, because they've helped us get to a stereoscopic 3D, but they have jumped onto that gravy train, as it were, and try to push stuff out and make lots of money from it.
I mean, I sympathise with what you're saying, because it's certainly how I felt sometimes going to the cinema and watching a 3D movie. I saw Up at the cinema in 3D, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But all my Pixar stuff up to that point had been in 2D, and it was magical. But I don't know whether I felt it really needed to be in 3D to be
but
better.
Toy Story 3 in 3D is brilliant.
Yeah, that's true.
That is good.
That's true. So
That
perhaps
is
it depends.
different. I've seen that in 3D and 2D, and it
But
is
also,
much
as
better
we were
3D.
discussing earlier, and I do, I sympathise with how you feel about it, that it's sort of an artificial imposition maybe, or that's certainly perception maybe, but I think there's a big difference between watching 3D at the cinema, which is where the public view of 3D has been formed, and watching at home on telly. I really, because I've been borrowing a 3D telly for the last week or so, and I don't know whether it's the proximity you have to the screen when you're, or just the fact that you've got this technology at home, but I think 3D on telly is genuinely impressive, and I'm still, sometimes irritated if every movie at the cinema has to be in 3D.
I think that is so. A lot of people I talk to, including some of my family who are suspicious about it, they sort of have this sense that it's being forced on them, that everything's going to be in 3D, and it's sort of, I don't want everything to be in 3D, and it's not like that any more than I choose to watch one particular TV channel. I think it's about consuming different types of content at different types of the day, at different moods, and I think 3D can deliver massively on certain times of the day or certain experiences or whatever you're looking for. I mean, we certainly, as a family, we sit down and watch as a family. And there's not many TV programs that makes us do that anymore. So for me, it's I love it because of that.
I mean, I think the other thing is that ultimately, viewers will just decide what happens. I mean, where it's inevitably it's subjective. I mean, I've got to say, when I saw Up in the cinema, I loved it, and I loved it probably as the 3D film I've loved the most, probably having seen it at the cinema. But none of our eyeballs are more valuable than each other's. We all have the ability to flick to another channel on the remote control, or to buy a TV or not buy a TV. So I think the job for us as a broadcaster is just to listen to viewers, to hear what they're saying, to see how they're consuming things, to try and anticipate what they want to do next, and try and offer them, breadth and quality, and hope they pass, because otherwise, if they don't want to, they'll go off and watch things elsewhere. They've got lots of things to do in their leisure time. So viewers will decide, I think.
And
just going back to that specific question about the CGI and the fossil, things you said earlier, Mark, there's in 2D programming, you come to that CGI moment where, here we go, here's CGI. I think that sequence just completely revolutionised CGI going forward, and it really turned it into an entertainment, a medium that we haven't seen in CGI for a long time. So I think it's
CGI
brilliant.
with live action, I think, is unique about it. To actually have the presenter and CGI going on in a seamless way is unusual.
Yeah, and David Attenborough did some great pretending.
He did,
He looked up at this
well, obviously, you look at his brother, so acting obviously runs in the family.
It runs in the family. Good, well, as I said, we were really grateful that you've attended today, and it's been great to be part of this festival, and we really appreciate all your input and your questions and everything. I'd also like to thank our panel. If I could trouble you for a round of applause for John Cassie, David Pound, Celia Taylor, and Cyrus Wilson.